I guess in reality, Ellen is my program manager, so I couldn't say no to her when she asked me to step in. And often we've been accused of thinking too much alike, so this will see if I can give her talk with basically chatting with her on Bluetooth on the drive down from New York yesterday and like skimming through her PowerPoint once, so we'll see. Anyway, Ellen is NOAA's Regional Climate Services Director. So basically what NOAA has in each of the region of the US is a Regional Climate Services Director. And basically the role of these directors are kind of a facilitator, bringing people together, getting the different feds and states and things like that to kind of talk and maybe not reinvent the wheel all the time and things like that to kind of get NOAA's data and services and products out to the public. And basically, I don't think this should be a surprise to any of us that Ellen says there's been a rising demand for climate information as people experience the effects of climate change, the impacts, look to adapt. And I think we also heard this morning that this occurs, these broad national assessments are nice, but it's really kind of down to the backyard. I know a lot of Delaware folks in the room, the woman who spoke from Delaware this morning, right? Delaware had to kind of do their own climate assessment for Delaware. New York has done the same thing. So I think this kind of rings true to the audience. And basically, the suite of NOAA services does span a lot of time and space scales. So, doing lots of things on both the global level and the local level. I would say basically Ellen and I are really kind of maybe working in this top arena, definitely local, a little bit regional, but definitely spanning the scales. So I'm ad-libbing here from my perspective is really what I've seen through my career in many years of a career as the Climate Service Director. It used to be enough to kind of give somebody a data analysis or saying, okay, this is the normal for this period of time. This is the number of days above 90. But really what we're seeing now is people are looking for a suite of kind of products. It's not enough to do an ag tool that says this was the number of growing degree days, but there needs to be a forecast component to that. There needs to be even maybe a longer type thing. Here I am, I'm sitting here in May or June. What's the chances by the end of the season I'm going to get this many degree days by the end of the season as an example? And that might be using one of the weather services seasonal to annual type forecasts, or it might be looking at the historical record and saying historically this is what it is. Again, NOAA has a lot of the national resources. Again, we've heard about them quite a bit this morning. The National Climate Assessment is one of those where they do try to break it out regionally, but again, do it at a very, very broad scale. So I would say there in the states, in the regions, it's probably a good starting point, but needs to be built upon more. And then also, NOAA also does the Climate Resiliency Toolkit. If you haven't checked that out, I would suggest you check that out. And there's kind of, let me see if I remember what she said. Yeah, I do. The Climate Resiliency Toolkit kind of has two components to this. The first one is there are a number of case studies, and this is a cool place to kind of get visibility to the types of things that you might do in your state or your sector and things like that. Here's something that we tried, here's something that we put out to our stakeholders, and kind of share it broadly. Share it with other stakeholders, share it with other researchers, share it with other states to say, hey, this is a good thing. The other part of the Climate Resiliency Toolkit is the Climate Explorer. In the Climate Explorer is really you can start to dig down into data, and I really wanted to plug this because basically my Dave Robinson is here. No. One of the things that the Climate Center does is collaborate with NOAA and really our data products and things like that that are part of this Climate Explorer. And in a way, again, Delaware showed the nice example of the graphs and things like that for Delaware with the downscale data. I think if you go in here and explore this, if you're not like Delaware and kind of have envy of Delaware to say, I'd like this for Maryland or one of the other states, you can see a lot of that functionality right there in the Climate Explorer. It's kind of down on that scale. It is downscale data like the HAHO data using a different methodology, the newest models, but you get very similar type graphics and you can download data and things like that. Really, where Ellen and I both come under is NCEI, the National Center for Environmental Information. I still call it NCDC because that's what it used to be. But really, they're the National Archive for climate data, and not just observed data on the ground, but upper air data, satellite data, ocean data, and things like that. So they're really the go-to place for data. But I would say probably data from like a research perspective. I want this data set, or I want this piece of a data set. Really where regional climate services come into NOAA is taking that data and making it useful for a purpose. So a lot of times what we see here, even with our satellite might be a good thing. We're now more and more products. I see Randy in the back, like with the drought monitor. It's not just station data. There's more and more remotely sensed data, or what I would call blended products, where yeah, the radar's nice, but do we really believe the radar? Well, here's some stations so we can ground truth that, and gives us a lot more spatial coverage and data coverage. NCDC's webpage, or NCEI's webpage, also has, there it is, you can see the URL, but also there a lot of ways to kind of get to the data and even do graphical analyses on here. So if you play around with that page on their, basically you want to see their climate at a glance, you can pick a parameter, pick a time step, and then basically see a time series through time. So we're basically looking at a 100-year time scale for, I guess, Blue Hill, Massachusetts in that case, if your eyes aren't that good. And then also what NCEI does is looks at, we've heard a lot about extremes, so here's one-day precipitation, again, looking at those trends on a station-by-station-by-station basis. Basically, what comes under NOAA's Regional Climate Services, and I guess this should really say, I think, NCEI's Regional Climate Services, but we do kind of bridge the different agencies with NOAA, is we like to think of it as kind of a triumvirate, I think was the word that Ellen was going to use. That it's up here at the national level, kind of the mothership, I think those would be words that Ellen would use, but then kind of comes down to the regional climate centers, and there's 6 of us across the country. We're basically facilitated by the Regional Climate Services Directors. There aren't 6 of those, and I think some of those are vacant, but they kind of provide that liaison role between the climate centers and the federal government. And there's also the state climatologists, people like Dave Robinson and Kevin and Dan Leathers, wherever he is, which really kind of, there he is, duh, right next to Dave. That really kind of get down, and again, from my perspective, and Dave and Dan, I'm sure you'll speak up if I'm saying something correctly, where it's really nice as a regional climate service director, I'm up at Cornell, and I really don't have the one-on-one interactions with folks in New Jersey or folks in Delaware and things like that, where Dave and Dan do, right? They're the local source, they're the trusted source of information. But kind of in the give and take, they know what data products I might have, what data tools that I might have, and they're able to leverage that to meet their customer needs. So I think in the most cases that's really worked, I think, as a good model in that cases, where I know what their special capabilities are, and they know what the regional capabilities are and the national capabilities. Kind of really what we do kind of runs the gamut. Shouldn't be anything too surprising to folks in the room. Anything from monitoring to data services. I think the key thing here, operational data services. It's like, it's tough being at a university and telling my systems guy that, yep, he has to be there, not be there, but has to be available 24/7 if something goes down or something like that, because people, farmers, actually big companies are relying on data services. We do a fair amount of outreach with partners, not too much in the prediction realm, but also research. I think that's a key thing in this system. It's not only providing the data, but kind of getting to intimately know what the problems are and outreaching and working to solve the problems for our users. As Regional Climate Services, we do put out some publications, outreach material, a quarterly outlook. Actually, the winter one will come out this week. Obviously, like everybody else, we maintain websites that basically focus in on sector-specific, decision-specific kind of tools and information. So luckily, Ellen picked my website. Again, just map-based products for the region, but I think kind of here on the sidebar kind of gives you an idea of the realm of things that are possible. So we're thinking here of ag, so you've number I work very closely with turfgrass folks in the region, across the region, different disease models, irrigation scheduling things. We do a lot with frost risk in apples and grapes coming from New York, but also broadly across the region. But also things like roadway freezing and thawing. Again, something I never thought of, but somebody in Maine, they actually open and close roads or put weight restrictions on roads in the wintertime based on how frozen or not frozen they are. So you can take something like that and really put a dollar figure to that, and you can say, hey, our data, our services are saving the state of Maine X in road repair costs, or saving the trucking companies X% because they can use these roads as opposed to having to take the longabout way. And also a lot with water resources. The drought monitor is there, actually something that will be launching, actually just launched, some of you might know, at least in New York and New England, a new drought early warning system out of NIDIS. So that's something that's coming online very, very shortly. You'll see more about that. We're starting to get a strategic plan out. And this is through NIDIS. So NIDIS has a grand vision of having these drought early warning systems across the country. They're doing a good job out west. I think basically from the northeast down are the areas that don't have it. So if you're from Delaware or New Jersey or Maryland, you may have to wait a bit. And also, one of the neat things that NOAA is doing, I think, is really they're really branching out more into the water side of things. Like now you can go and get a very specific weather forecast, atmospheric forecast, but now they're really starting to dive down more in the hydrology. So you'll start to see more specific flood forecasts and things like that, runoff and things like that, almost at the same local scale that you might see for weather observations. So that's kind of just something that's starting up, but I think has a lot of, could have a lot of ramifications or use in the ag sector. We talked about heavy rainfall, we talked about runoff, we talked about nutrient runoff. This will be, I think, a key piece of information for things like that. And like I said, I'm not Ellen McRae, but I gave her talk and it's recorded, so she'll know what I said. So.